Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back from yesterday's first day's proceedings, where we're focusing on an assessment of the prospects for cooperation between the United States and its Arab friends, allies, and partners in the Middle East, North Africa region, or the Arab region, the Middle East, and the Islamic world, however you care to refer to these geographically, globally vital parts of the planet. The Middle East Policy Council plays an important role in addressing the kinds of issues and challenges that confront policymakers and decision makers that are daily forced to grapple with these issues. And we have as the chairwoman of the Middle East Policy Council, Ms. Yasmin Zaki. The Middle East Policy Council is, in my view, without competitor or rival in its publishing of the Middle East Policy Journal, where it brings together some of the foremost scholars of the region to discuss and debate these vexing issues. It publishes lengthy book reviews that would otherwise be given short shrift elsewhere. And it has held dozens of seminars on Capitol Hill and the offices of the House of Representatives and elsewhere in the congressional corridors to focus on these kinds of issues to American policymakers and foreign affairs practitioners. Please welcome Ms. Yasmin Zaki.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back for Day 2 of the Road to 2050, Assessment of Arab Regional Possibilities and the Future of U.S. Cooperation. I'm Yasmin Zaki, the chairwoman of the Middle East Policy Council's Board of Directors. As the Middle East Policy Council welcomes new leadership, we are proud of our organization's accomplishments and motivated by our continual leadership in the policy world. Our mission is to provide policymakers and the public with credible, comprehensive information and analysis on political, economic, and cultural issues pertaining to U.S.-Middle East relations. We achieve this through 3 core programs. 1, our world-renowned quarterly journal, Middle East Policy, one of the most cited publications on the region in the entire world, according to Google Scholar. Since 1982, Middle East Policy has provided policymakers and the public with credible, comprehensive analysis pertaining to U.S.-Middle East relations, publishing high-quality research by top scholars and public officials. Middle East Policy continues to broaden its reach through the MEPC.org website, making our homepage the go-to destination for analysis and breaking news from the region. 2, our policy products and programming series, which provides policymakers with tailored resources and conferences aimed at enhancing their understanding of regional geopolitical developments, in turn driving effectiveness in U.S. policy. Our policy products are distributed via email to an influential network of over 8,000 targeted recipients, including more than 4,000 members of Congress and staffers. Additional readers include foreign diplomats, U.S. executive branch leaders, think tank experts, academics, and domestic and foreign journalists. As of today, the Council has hosted 113 Capitol Hill conferences, inviting expert panelists to discuss a range of pressing policy issues facing the Middle East. These prestigious conferences are held in the Senate and House office buildings of the U.S. Congress. And 3 are expanded educational initiatives, including our acclaimed long-standing program, Teach Mideast, for students and educators to embolden the next generation of leaders beginning in their primary school years. Our educational outreach spans the entire school leadership pipeline. Our website, teachmideast.org, provides a variety of educational materials, including country profiles, resource guides, book and film reviews, and more. Its podcast, Talk Mideast, highlights the arts and social scenes by interviewing Middle Eastern artists and creative professionals. In line with our educational programs, we are excited to announce MEPC's virtual classroom initiative, Building Bridges, which aims to enhance cross-regional understanding and knowledge while facilitating collaboration among the next generation of global leaders in the U.S. and MENA regions. I am honored to chair this esteemed organization alongside our experienced and innovative leadership team. MEPC President Gina Abercrombie Winstanley, Executive Director Basma El Hussein, and Vice Chairwoman Janet Breslin Smith. As we celebrate the Council's 42 years of influence, we look forward to advancing the U.S.-Middle East relations for decades to come. And now we will transition to our first panel of the day on youth development in the Middle East.
We'll now turn to the first session of this second day of proceedings of this two-day conference. And we have to assist us in this regard, Ms. Marwa Gumrawi. She's the Communications and Operations Manager of the Washington Center for Yemeni Studies. And she'd be focusing on the macro aspect of empowering youth in the Middle East, North Africa region. Ms. Gumrawi.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed participants and distinguished panelists, welcome to the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations Conference, The Road to 2050, an assessment of Arab regional possibilities and the future of U.S. cooperation. My name is Marwa Gumrawi, and I represent the Washington Center for Yemeni Studies. I am honored to be your moderator for today's thought-provoking panel discussion on empowering Arab youth for the future, navigating Vision 2050 trends and challenges. We are gathered here today with a common goal to explore the pathways to empower Arab youth and prepare them for the challenges and opportunities for Vision 2050. To kickstart our panel, we will begin with presentations from our esteemed panelists who bring a wealth of experience and expertise to this discussion. Mr. Andrew Baird, President and CEO of Education for Employment, EFE, will provide us with a regional perspective on youth Arab development in the Arab world. Following that, Mr. Mahmoud Abdullah, Anera Lebanon Bekaa Area Manager, will shed light on Lebanon's unique challenges and successes in empowering its youth for a brighter future. Finally, Mr. Ali Marafi, research analyst at the World Bank Group, will offer valuable insights into youth development in the GCC region and the broader Arab context. After the presentations, we will dive into an engaging discussion that will delve deeper into the challenges faced by Arab youth, the strategies to bridge existing gaps, and the role of the collaboration in shaping a prosperous future for the region. Today's discourse will revolve around the pathways to empower Arab youth, bridging the gaps in education, employment, and in entrepreneurship, and exploring how collaboration among various stakeholders can drive sustainable and authentic progress. To begin with, it is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker for today's panel. With a wealth of expertise and a passion for empowering youth, our speaker has made a significant impact in the field of education and employment. And Mr. Andrew Baird, as the President and CEO of the Education for Employment, EFE has tirelessly worked to bridge the gap between the young talent and inclusive opportunities, shaping a brighter future for countless individuals worldwide. With over 25 years of experience in private sector-led strategies for sustainable employment worldwide, Andrew brings valuable insights as our first esteemed speaker today. He had co-founded the Global Center for Youth Employment, and he has held leadership positions in renowned organizations like RTI International and the Peace Corps. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Andrew Baird to share his valuable insights and experiences with us today.
Thank you, Marwa, for a kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to a lively discussion with the other panelists here today. Education for Employment focus, just as by way of background, is really looking to bridge the divide between education and employment that exists around the MENA region, throughout the Arab world, and frankly, across most of the globe that we see. The region remains the most difficult place in the world for youth to find employment. It has the highest unemployment rate. And kind of fascinating, the statistics for educated youth are more challenging in terms of employment than those with less education. So as you move up the education scale, it becomes increasingly difficult, it would seem, to find relevant employment. So EFE's founder really was focused on trying to bridge this skills gap. And the way that we have gone about this is by building a network of organizations across the region and beginning with the market needs. So EFE works with about 3,000 to 4,000 private sector employer partners that communicate what the needs that they are looking for are. And we then develop programs that are very specifically matched to those private sector needs. So this could be in almost any sector, including retail, hospitality, engineering, medical, and IT. We run programs across the board. So that's kind of the perspective that when I'm making my remarks, my focus is really on that education and employment gap with the end goal of finding ways to make sure and to ensure that youth are leveraging the skills and the talents that they have and have access to the resources that will enable them to be really in charge of their own futures. I'm going to give a couple of remarks about where I see the state of development. That's a big question of youth development in the region. I think that there are a couple of hallmarks. So one is that as many countries around the world, many regions around the world, we're still saddled with an educational system that has not adequately adapted to the needs of the modern, the current job market, or even looking towards the future. And so educational reform, I think, is a critical need in the region. Connections to the private sector. We just don't see them very often. So when you look at the absence of programs that provide practical work experience, internships, they're really the exception rather than the rule. What we see is that youth who come into our programs very often at 22, 23, 24 years old have really never stepped foot into a professional work environment other than as a consumer. And so they're not prepared for what the requirements would be to begin a successful work career. So bridging that gap is really important, providing exposure to various sectors. I think a second thing is the expectations that we see youth have. And we're seeing this evolving and really fairly rapidly, but there's still a gap between the expectations that youth have when they're entering education and what the realities are. So when we have a database of about close to 200,000 youth who have applied to our programs over the last several years. And what we can see is that there's still a high expectation for working in the administration. So working for the governments. That's still, particularly in the Gulf region, a high expectation, whereas the jobs that are available in that sector continue to be fewer and fewer. Engineering is another, medical profession is another. If we were to wrap those three, that makes the majority of what the anticipated job areas that youth have when they are entering into the job markets. What we're seeing where the jobs are, however, are in different areas. And so managing those expectations is a critical factor. And there's a lot of reasons behind those. Some of them are historical and some of them are family driven, social driven. There's also a phenomena throughout the region, and this is where we get into the gap, where there exists side by side very high youth unemployment rates, the highest in the world, again, and particularly for women. Women unemployment rate is almost twice that of men. There exists also a large number of unfilled jobs. So there is this strange dynamic of high unemployment with this dearth of talent in particular sectors. And so trying to bridge that gap and close that is another critical. And then I would say one other area that we're seeing a strong need is kind of the psychosocial support systems that are available are still not developed to the point where they need to be. So lots of programs out there really focus on the technical skills, but not so much some of the more social and other skills that really are necessary for the region to continue to be moving forward and competitive and to support youth in the way that they need to be supported. So I think there's lots of positive things that are happening and changes, but we need to continue to move the pace more quickly, and there are some critical gaps that remain.
Thank you, Andrew, for this valuable insight. I do already have some questions for you, but we'll get back to those in the discussion part of the panel. Right now, I would like to welcome Mr. Mahmoud Abdullah, the Lebanon Bekaa Area Manager at Anera. Mahmoud's dedication to humanitarian work and his diverse experience with refugees across the region and Eastern Europe make him a true asset to our discussion today. With a background in communications and protection, Mahmoud plays a vital role in Anera's program development and implementation, focusing on basic literacy and numeracy education, vocational training, and innovative solid waste management projects in the Bekaa area. We are privileged to have Mahmoud join us as a speaker all the way from Lebanon, bringing his valuable insights to our conversation. Welcome, Mahmoud, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Marwa. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depends on the timing, from the Syrian borders, the Lebanese Syrian borders. Thank you, Andrew, for this lovely presentation. And it's nice to see a different aspect as well from other areas. If I want to talk about Lebanon and maybe focus more about Lebanon, maybe I should be giving a small introduction about the situation in Lebanon, about this young nation that is in political turmoil, in a very bad economic situation. And that's also coming over the refugee crisis that has been here from 1948 when the Palestinians came, and now with the Syrian refugee crisis. Well, the youth over here, they basically, their dreams are deferred. Yeah, so they're not represented. They don't have like proper development programs, no future aspects, and they cannot secure proper good education. And here's Anera's role, actually, it comes in to be part of this change and this positive change to actually take part in changing or bringing back these dreams that some of them think they lost, because this reality goes a long way to explain why Lebanon is in turmoil. The Lebanese, let's say, revolution or uprising that happened was mostly youth. They are fed up with the situation, with the plummeting economy, the poor basic services, that is also still affected by the strikes and by the laws and rules and regulations that have not changed despite the uprising. The low income and, of course, the joblessness that's within the host community and the refugee community, which is the most vulnerable. I think it's mostly explained in how our country director, Ms. Samar Al-Yasir, said. You begin with a dream, a plan for your life. If it's taken away, what do you have? You have nothing anymore. So with Anera programs, that's basically focusing on bringing back the students that have been out of school for a long period, especially when you're talking about refugees that have fled the war if it's in Syria or the Palestinian camps, where they do not have the economic capability to go back to school, and try to put them back into the Lebanese school system. Or when we take those who have been, of course, not privileged to have the education, but they have the skilled labor, to put them back into the market and have this proper network with the private sector. Here is Anera's role is to connect them back with their dreams, what they have been actually dreaming of all of their life, when they have their own startup businesses, their small businesses, and they grow them when it comes to actually going into the new trend of green businesses, the digital, the online. So Anera's role over here, and we managed actually this year to have proper employment with proper salaries. Let's say, I'm not going to say like excellent salaries, but proper salaries for more than 1,300 youth within 10 months that have been trained into skilled, of course, the training in the private sector. When it comes to the medical health, that was highly affected by COVID, and of course the economic situation, and lots of expertise fled the country to the Gulf region or to Europe or even to Canada and the U.S. For, of course, a better economic situation. When it comes to the hospitality sector, that was highly affected, and especially Lebanon, its main source of income is tourism. When it comes to the industrial sector, that's actually starting to boom in Lebanon after the economic crisis, because Lebanon as a country was relying on the exports more than, on the imports more than the exports. So they did not have any industries. Now they're starting to have like more local production. So they do need the youth over there. So here comes Anera's role and other maybe NGOs that have to bring this youth and get these skilled laborers to train them and to give them a bit of motivation through our cash for work systems or programs, and through our own job training programs, to have them within these companies and to grow and actually have better chances, instead of actually they sit there and start waiting for small amounts of US fresh dollars after the plummeting of the Lebanese pound to survive. And wishing they would have some kind of relatives outside that will pull them out, or illegally travel to Europe and the US. So Anera is playing a very important role in actually helping these youth to stand up again, get back into the market and get back into the educational system after the let's say the situation of the education system over here, and all of the governmental departments within the country, due to the political turmoil and political instability, have failed actually to accomplish the dreams of this youth.
Thank you, Mahmoud, for those insights, and we'll definitely dive deeper into your work and some of the programs that you do and the trends that you see in Lebanon shortly. Before that, I would like to introduce our third speaker today, Mr. Ali Marafi. Welcome. Ali is an accomplished expert with a remarkable academic background in international affairs and development in the Middle East, holding both a Bachelor of Arts and a Master of Arts degree in international affairs from the prestigious George Washington University. Ali's focused concentration in conflict resolution, international security, and development has shaped his impressive career trajectory. Currently serving as a research analyst for the GCC Country Management Unit at the World Bank Group, Ali's expertise has been instrumental in supporting various practices, including social protection and jobs, macroeconomics, human development, and governance. Through his efforts, Ali has produced multiple country-specific research reports, delving into critical areas such as labor markets, education, foreign investment, governance, political economics, and climate change in the GCC. We are honored to have you with us today, Ali, and your profound expertise to enrich our discussion on empowering Arab youth. Thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marwa. And thank you both, Andrew and Mahmoud, for giving some regional and local perspectives. In terms of what I'm going to be speaking about, I'm going to dig deeper a little bit on the GCC side of things, more of a high income perspective in terms of how the MENA region is behaving and what are some of the trends in terms of 2030, 2040, and 2050 for the future. Starting off, it's definitely very important to note that the collection of the 6 GCC monarchies share very similar characteristics in terms of the political, economic, and social framework, although each of these countries is currently expecting or experiencing different phases of development in terms of their economic development and their youth workforce. Additionally, the GCC states also have varying levels of demographic transitions. So the population is not on par with each of these countries, especially when we look at the fertility rates and the population growth rates. There is definitely a regional shift towards the future, towards visions that have been guiding the principles and the reforms of these governments. But it's also very important to note that there is a lot of work to be done and that these GCC governments are understanding that diversification is going to be a big aspect of how these reforms are going to be put into place, and to give them credit for actually working on some of these very critical areas that essentially are supposed to streamline the process into transforming all of these economies into more dynamic and diverse in terms of the private and the public sector. Some economic statistics in terms of the GCC overall performance over the past year or two, I would say in 2022, GCC economies performed very well in comparison to MENA and the entire world, especially with the geopolitical conflicts, the supply chain issues that we're experiencing, and a decrease in oil production. GCC economies performed very well in comparison to other economies, with a GDP growth of 7.3% in 2022 and a non-oil sector growth of 4.3% in 2022 as well. Of course, these are numbers according to the World Bank's latest analysis. And we do have a non-hydrocarbon sector that is experiencing most of its growth in construction, retail, and tourism sectors. Inflation rates as well in the GCC in comparison to other regions are much better, with a 3.6% inflation and a median of around 9% globally. We can definitely see the difference in terms of the standard of living and the affordability of some of the main commodities. Finally, a budget surplus has been registered this year with about 4.3% of GDP, minus the exception of Bahrain, which has been weathering through some fiscal reforms as well, and has been experiencing a deficit for some time. The private sector rate employments have been also on the increase, especially if we look into Saudi Arabia, something that's a great push forward. Human capital and investment continue also to be on the rise in the GCC. There's a high emphasis on women employment more than ever. Female labor force participation rates in the GCC actually are the highest when we look at the MENA region. The MENA region experiences a 19% in female labor force participation. But if we look at some of the countries, I mean, UAE is at 52% female labor force participation, Kuwait is at 50%, and Bahrain at 47%, Saudi Arabia at 35%. So these are remarkable numbers in comparison to the region as a whole. In terms of youth statistics and to better paint the picture on, which country is leading in terms of the youth bulge, starting off with Oman, 50% of its population is under the age of 25. And then we have Saudi Arabia at 46% under 25, Kuwait at 40%, the United Arab Emirates at 35%, Bahrain at 35%, and finally Qatar at 25% of its population under the age of 25. We can talk more about rentier theories, rentier economies, and how they behave, but I don't think that's the purpose of this discussion. But it's definitely very important to note and pick on some of the things Andrew said previously about how social contracts essentially create the contract between the rulers and their constituents, in essence. The social contract between GCC governments and nationals has included highly paid government jobs, unemployment benefits, subsidies on daily goods and services, free healthcare, free education, free child support, and very attractive retirement benefits and pensions. And essentially, this came from the region that was heavily impacted by the energy sector, the oil and gas markets. And as a result, the states developed large government entities that eventually employed nationals for the strict purpose of, dispersing the wealth accumulated from the oil and energy sector. Now, this trickles into the main gaps and challenges that the GCC states face in terms of economic and youth development, because the two main reasons or the two main challenges in terms of my perspective towards this stem from, first, the educational system, and second, labor market trends and expectations, exactly like Andrew said. I don't want to dig deeper into that because I'm sure our discussion will discuss some of these topics, but in essence, the education structure does not prepare most students for a job. In addition, the high level of expectations from a history of very, generous public sector jobs essentially altered the way that, youth have been thinking of employment, especially when you look into the private sector and entry-level wages, which are nowhere near public sector wages. I mean, we have almost a 50% difference in terms of a starting wage at the private sector and a starting wage at the public sector. So there's that, and there's the education gap. In addition, coming from countries that are heavily supported by the financial and fiscal freedom of oil markets, you have very large public sector and state-owned enterprises that are essentially taking most of the market share in terms of the economy. As long as GCC countries are able to push for more privatization and allow for these state-owned enterprises to fully interact with, market trends, international economies, and the different types of dynamics that are going on, I think this would essentially lead to a more dynamic and larger private sector. Very important social reforms have also been put into place. Many of them actually are very positive in terms of economic development. We have the UAE being a leader in cutting down energy subsidies to save on energy, as well as electricity, water, gas, and other services, introducing income taxes and VAT laws. We have Saudi Arabia following pursuit with also VAT laws and a way to target social protection systems instead of giving subsidies for all. Kuwait, on the other hand, experiences a different dynamic because of its democratic nature in terms of a parliament. It's very unpopular to push for these types of laws, and therefore legislation has been very tough to create, targeted social protection reforms and cut down on subsidies. But there is a push to introduce income taxes towards large private sector corporations, which I think is very positive in terms of the return towards the annual GDP of the economy. Many structural reforms also that have been going on. Just a couple that I would bring off the top of my head is Saudi Arabia launching the National Strategy for Industry, for example, the Supply Chain Initiative to attract global industries, visa regulations and laws that allow for many people to come in and out for tourism purposes. We have a total of $2.7 billion invested in funds that will just look at local and regional development in terms of commercial and tourism and residential products. The UAE introduced energy incentive schemes to improve energy efficiency with companies that provide, less levels of carbon dioxide through its energy program, tax laws to support people that are filing taxes, flexible laws for local and foreign investments to attract investments into the country, and finally, reducing business fees for many different services and business environments for both local and international investors. Bahrain also has had some very great structural reforms. New labor reforms through the kafala system have been changed. A regulatory sandbox was introduced in which companies and technologies are able to be tested before they are launched through a regulatory framework. And finally, I personally think that the future for the GCC is very bright. They are moving in accordance to a strict plan and very broad and important vision that governs the way their future is going to be allocated. We have, by 2050, almost all of the countries are pledging net zero. That's a large amount of energy that needs to be created from renewable sources. Large amounts of jobs will be created within these sectors, in addition to a push towards the green economy and new skills and technologies that will be adaptive within the region. And I think the region has a very comparative advantage in terms of other areas in MENA and the world, especially for its abundance of financial resources and its large youth population, in which it can train, develop, and essentially steer towards the right direction for the future. With that being said, pretty much concludes my 2 cents on the GCC and where the youth is going. And I look forward to this discussion and any questions any of you may have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ali, for sharing this perspective with us. Now we will move towards the exciting part of our panel today, which is the discussion phase. I would like to direct my first question to Andrew. You had already given us a picture of the current state of youth development in the region, and presented some of the challenges that we're facing. Now, one of the questions that, or one of the points that stood out to me that you had mentioned was that there are jobs available in certain sectors that are not being fulfilled. Could you please tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of dynamics at work. So one is just simply the lack of programs that are in place that are preparing youth for some of these sectors. So it might be, Ali was mentioning some of the green sectors, green economy jobs that are out there. And so there are employers that are looking for talent in some of these areas, which simply doesn't exist. There's another kind of social aspect to this. Some countries refer to it as the culture of shame, where there are certain sectors of the economy where youth and frankly, the families of youth simply don't want their children working in. And so this has historically been some of the sectors like hospitality, construction, others where they feel this is not the appropriate place for their children to be, and particularly for women to be working. So there are jobs available which are hard to fill. I actually saw several years ago, Tunisia had 101,000 jobs available on the market that had been unfilled for at least 6 months or more, simultaneous with their high youth unemployment rate. So there's a lot of factors behind it, and we need to continue to push. And one of the ways that we've been trying to do is to really focus on normalizing some of the job sectors. So campaigns that will focus on women working in maybe sectors which traditionally they had not before, and highlighting examples of successful females in those particular sectors. And then the other side of it is just preparing the educational systems, training systems to feed more into the market demand.
So when working with several countries with EFE in the region, what are the recurring trends that are affecting the success rates of your mission? What are things that hold back your work and your advancement of your programs and providing training for employment for the youth? And another thing, following up on what you had just said, the family's perspective and how valuable it is or continues to be very valuable in the career choices that the youth are making. So what are we doing to create a shift in their perspective, to educate the families and the parents outside of just the youth?
Yeah, well, I'll start there. I mean, you're right. And certainly families' influence on their children's career decisions is not limited to this region. We see this around the world. In particular, in the region, you could say that there are several sectors which always rise to the top. Some that I've mentioned before: engineering, medical, and administration jobs are always top on the list. And so I think really focusing on programs that are probably providing, whether it's through social media, through other campaigns, more information about the opportunities that are there. IT now obviously is becoming a much more accepted area. People see the advantages there, and so more and more are being directed. But again, dangerous. 2 years ago, we all would have said, become a coder. Now, maybe not so much, given generative AI and its impact on that sector. And so there just needs to be a constant finger on the pulse of where there are opportunities. And our training and educational institutions need to become much more agile. So I would say that the biggest challenge that we continue to face are youth with expectations that have been built over years. I think Ali gave a good explanation of some of that. And that's certainly one. And then working with the educational institutions, whether it's universities or ministries, and really bridging that gap so that they're more agile, they're more attuned to what the needs are.
Does your organization do any or communicates with the education system or the public sector or ministries on this regard?
We do, and more or less depending on the countries that we're working in. I would say that our holy grail is systems change. Ideally, an organization like Education for Employment shouldn't be needed to bridge that gap. That should be happening within the system. The preparation for employment in the sectors that are hiring should happen. So we absolutely work with universities at that level. We work with secondary and technical education systems to try to bring in some of that perspective and embed, frankly, some of our programs with them.
Wonderful. I would like to direct my question to Mahmoud now, just adding on to what Andrew had said. Can you tell us a little bit more about how these trends are affecting the youth in Lebanon? What are some sectors that have a workforce gap but are not supported in the education system, or the youth are not being educated or trained on entering these sectors, and how your programs with Anera affect not just the employment not just helping the youth find employment, but also the cycle that supports the youth in the business, the market, etc.
Thank you, Marwa, and thank you, Andrew, again, and Ali. Basically, if when we talk about trends, I cannot say that there's a certain trend that the youth are going towards, especially when this economic situation, as I mentioned in my presentation in the beginning, that they're willing to have any type of jobs that can give them any kind of financial support. But still, on the other hand, Anera's role is to get these students or these youth actually and put them in the market that, let's say, where the need is. And if we can study the Lebanese market, and of course, we also rely on other assessments and studies that have been done, for example, the International Labour Organization did one recently, we would see that, of course, taking into consideration the characteristics of each area in Lebanon, like in Bekaa, for example, the agricultural sector, is one of the strongest sectors. But still, we cannot find the youth that are skilled enough to be within this sector because they are not trained within the educational system to be part of the agricultural development of the area. So we would move maybe more into also the medical sector. The youth in the past, like let's say 3 to 5 years, have not taken the best proper education when it comes to the medical or the health sector due to COVID, due to online trainings, and which if we come to this sector, you would need more hands-on training in hospitals, in public health centers, or internships with doctors. So you can find here, we found here that there was a big gap actually that needs to be covered. So Anera was, you can say, the connection to take this youth and fill the gap that they had in the education sector, and give them these crash trainings, crash programs, crash projects that are within 1 month to 2 months to be prepared to actually build on with the information they have, more like a refresher, let's say, or more on a hands-on, on-job training within private sector hospitals, the biggest names in the country, so we can actually push these skills to get them properly into the market and actually manage to go through the several departments within the medical sector and accomplish what they need. Another sector that was actually very interesting, and I also mentioned in my presentation, was the industrial. Several factories over here, the biggest factories, because in Bekaa they have lots of space actually to build factories and industries. They're missing industrial mechanics, and this is after we studied or we went through like an assessment. The industrial mechanics or the engineers that are coming out of the universities, they're not prepared to be actually part of the workforce in these factories. So we also managed to work on this and have special programs for the mechanical engineering, electrical engineers, even biomedical engineers who actually took part within hospitals and factories that are more into the medical let's say medical category. So these programs, Anera, that have established have been a big push for those, for both actually, that the private sector and the educational system, to bridge this gap between both, let's say, stakeholders.
So in a way, your programs serve an alternative to what a co-op would be here in the United States for engineering students.
In a way, yes, we can say that, or we can actually, again, because of the economic situation, we are bridging the gap that was created. You know, some of them would usually, in the normal situation in Lebanon, when they actually graduated from universities, they had the chance to go into internships, into these factories or into these companies where they actually build on these skills. But this gap that was created, you know, somebody needed to cover this with a program that would actually take this youth into the market. So we played both roles actually. So we're playing the example that you gave basically in a way, and in another way we also bridged this gap that was created due to COVID and the economic situation and the whole plummeting economy in the country.
Do you see a rise perhaps, or is there, or do you foresee the education institutions and universities partnering with these factories and industries that are on the rise in Lebanon so that they can create these training and internship programs for their students?
Yes, definitely. And Anera actually is advocating for this now. We have a special advocacy campaign, and we're trying to build some kind of consortium with the universities to work on more than one level. We're working on specific job fairs to connect the private sector with the educational system, with the non-governmental organizations within one program. We're also creating we're piloting actually a program. It's called the Advanced Program. Where we take 15% of the youth that we have and place them within the universities for 3 to 6 months to have specific trainings, specialized from universities, to have specialized certificates that will help them actually grow even more and more within the market. So yes, definitely we are seeing this, and the education system is getting more and more involved. And you can see the change within the education system in universities and vocational training centers that are moving more towards hands-on and training, because like actually if we had a specific discussion with the private sector, and the private sector, they're moving towards more vocational training centers than universities, because they would see that universities are more theoretical than actually practical. So they're moving towards more vocational training centers or youth with experience but with no educational background. So we need to close this gap. So we are advocating and we are working together with the educational institutes to actually emphasize the importance of this.
Fantastic. So we are seeing the private sector and the educational system sort of maneuvering towards that and providing different services for this development and providing these opportunities for the youth. I do have one more question for you. Have you seen any trends in perhaps taking students that have graduated with, maybe certain degrees but training them for other jobs that they may not have, their education was not meant for, right? So is that something that you work on?
We don't work on, actually, unfortunately, we see this because we see like lots of students who have graduated with certain degrees and are trying to work in other professions due to the economic situation. But we are seeing a new trend of students that are using what they studied in other sectors. Like, for example, one of our projects and programs was medical accounting. So we had a few of our students who are nurses who went into the medical accounting, and which was an added value to the accounting department in the private sector hospitals. So they're using both sides of the accounting experience that they're receiving from our program and the medical background that they're having. Also, biomedical electrical maintenance. You'd see students who are into the mechanical engineering, which is close enough, but they're also going into the medical sector. So they're trying to connect. Let's say, experiences together to reach what they need to reach. But we can see another trend on the other hand, where you can see students who have studied business administration and they're just like going towards hospitality, like cooking and stuff like that, which is unfortunate in some places. But if it's their dream, we will actually help them achieve their dream within the context that is best for them.
Thank you, Mahmoud. I would like to now ask Ali. You had mentioned that in the GCC, the educational system is not currently adept to preparing students for the jobs that are on the rise in the region. Could you tell us a little bit more about what steps are being taken to enhance the quality of education and skills training programs to meet the evolving needs of the job market, and empowering young people in the GCC or in the Arab world overall? As you had mentioned, the focus on diversification in the workforce as well.
Absolutely. And one thing to bring to note is, the heavy bureaucracies of public sector and public schooling systems in the GCC. It's very tough to get reforms passed. It's very hard to change, the way things have been done. And the educational system in most GCC countries has been borrowed instead of fully invented. to fit their own needs and their own culture and their own social constructs. It's a borrowed system that eventually has its loopholes and issues in terms of generating the correct type of student for the workforce. In addition, the GCC, focuses very heavily on investing in higher education, post-education, with very generous scholarships and stipends and public sector opportunities for nationals to go ahead and travel to the United States, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Egypt, Jordan, wherever in the world to basically get a higher level of degree. Now, some of the gaps that are evident within that is basically giving the students the flexibility to choose majors and to choose their topics of studying. And the way I see it as a result creates, gaps in the employment type of opportunities, because students are not choosing what is prevalent in the labor market. Instead, they are choosing what is based on their own interests. And that's not wrong, that's not incorrect. It just needs more tweaking and aligning in terms of what's available in the labor market and what type of majors do we need in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Another thing that has been recently experiencing a lot of change is private schooling and private sector development. A lot of private schools are now offering coding courses, cooking classes, business administration classes, understanding, types of entrepreneurship and what other ways there are in which a person can be more involved in the economy instead of taking the traditional route of education, a degree, and then a public sector job or wage in the end. Some of the things that, all of these countries have been engaged in, for example, I have a list of opportunities that both government and private sector have been working on in order to bolster youth development and skills. For example, in Bahrain, they have a program called Tamkeen, which provides, financial support and training for specific skills and certifications for Bahraini youth. There's the Labor Fund internship program. There's the Bahrain Polytechnic College. There's Youth City 2030, which creates a youth-focused community in Bahrain that essentially works on nurturing youth talents. In Kuwait, you have the Public Authority for Applied Training and Education. This is strictly vocational in nature, training people more on the operational things and the practical skills that are needed, let's say carpentry, electricity, many other plumbing, for example. These are surprisingly lucrative if you look into the amount of money they generate in the economy and in a large private sector dynamic. We have many awards in Kuwait, additionally, and the National Fund for SMEs, which pushes for entrepreneurs to build their own business models and their own businesses. Unfortunately, the diversification of businesses has not been very successful. Most entrepreneurs have stuck to restaurants and coffee shops, with the exception of some very well-established private sector companies that have been expanding beyond Kuwait and in the region as a whole. Oman as well is very focused on vocational training. Reforming their vocational training curriculum is something that they have been working on. They have the Riyada program, which also supports training, mentoring, and opportunities for entrepreneurs. Qatar as well is very advanced in that type of dynamic, with Saudi Arabia, I would say, taking the lead in terms of the most generous and step forward they've taken. I think Vision 2030 says it all in terms of what the country sees for its youth, its economic opportunities, and eventually push towards the future. We have, the Human Resources Development Fund, which works on strictly building human capital and capacity development. And just from working in the World Bank within the GCC country management unit, I've seen almost all GCC states, with the exception of one or two, that have come forward to ask for strict capacity development programs. And these programs are essentially in public sector environments that are tailored towards creating more streamlined processes, toning down the bureaucracies, and working on skills that are specific towards creating a dynamic and forward-thinking type of public sector that is governed in a proper way, that has, the regulatory assessments conducted prior to anything being pushed forward, that has skills, secondment programs, internships for government employees to come to the United States, to come to the biggest organizations, get that experience from subject matter experts, and engaged with international organizations to understand, a better understanding of what are the international best practices. That pretty much sums up what I have to say for that question. And thank you so much for asking it.
Thank you, Ali. We have about 10 minutes left in this discussion, and I have a couple more questions for you all. Since you brought up, the entrepreneurships and youth initiatives in starting their own businesses, I would like to hear from each of you, a little bit more on how we can foster. I will direct this question to Andrew, actually. How can we foster a culture of entrepreneurship among Arab youth and provide them with the necessary resources to start their own businesses? And what are some trends that we're seeing in that? Additionally, what is the plausibility of those businesses and initiatives to go regional and not just stay local?
Yeah, great question, and a really important one, I think, for what we're seeing happening now. I will say in the last 20 years, I've witnessed what I would call nothing short of a seismic shift in the mentality around entrepreneurship. 20 years ago, when I was doing entrepreneurship programming in the region, I was told people just aren't going to be interested in it. And there are a whole host of reasons. That is completely not the case now. We have been running entrepreneurship programs throughout the region. We usually have somewhere between 20 and 25 applicants for every one place in the classroom in the program that we have. So demand is extremely high. I would say one of the single biggest things that needs to be done is to continue to work on the enabling environment. And so includes everything from the regulatory environment that governs small businesses and startups to the financial resources that are available to them, everything that includes bankruptcy law. All of that really needs to be continually examined and reformed so that it really encourages people to go in and to take risk. Starting your own business, there is risk. We all know anywhere in the world, most small businesses that start up fail. That's just how it is. And creating an environment where that's okay, both from a social point of view, that it's okay to have that failure, but also from a legal perspective as well, that encourages people to do that. So I think the will is there. I think we see youth more and more interested in doing it. Now, to the second part of the question, I think the creation of regional networks in entrepreneurship is a really critical step to be able to do that. So beginning to share resources, sharing market information could really be an accelerator to helping these smaller businesses that may be focused very locally expand within the country, but also throughout the region.
Thank you for that. And now I will ask Mahmoud just a little bit more about the collaboration aspect of youth development. As an organization that's working in Lebanon, how has working with government entities, educational institutions, private sector organizations, and civil society worked together more effectively to address these challenges? So what's it like for your organization to receive this kind of support from international organizations? How can we foster more collaboration and facilitate more communication with the countries that are doing well in the Middle East, like the countries of the GCC, when it comes on to education and employment opportunities?
Well, as you see, as I mentioned in my presentation, that the government entities in general, they're not strong enough actually to apply these projects and the programs. But our collaboration with the educational institutes, especially the private ones, especially that the public ones, they're more related towards the ministry, so they're not that effective with all the political turmoil and the strikes that are going on. So they're not even opening, so this is not helping us to actually collaborate with them. So the collaboration with the educational institutes, private sector, civil societies, and let's say other local NGOs, and sometimes it goes to the local governance over here, has been pretty effective, especially in facilitating our work on the ground and outreaching the youth and identifying the needs of villages, of cities, and actually other locations that can help us also in assessing what kind of needs that are within the private sector, and of course being more like community. We have this community-based approach towards the market within, let's say, Bekaa or the South or Tripoli. Now, definitely, I think the main factor that could, let's say, the support that could be given from the international communities is towards these government departments, and actually the restructuring and the reforms that need to be implemented yesterday, not even now. Everybody's waiting for them. The international community is waiting for them. The United Nations is waiting for them. Even the population is waiting for the government departments to step up and actually take the responsibilities. International NGOs, local NGOs cannot take the role of government in their jobs. We can close gaps, we can support, we can help, but we cannot take the role of the government. So the main support should go towards these entities actually to help them, so we can actually have better collaboration, to fight these challenges and to reach the goals that we all need to do towards the youth and towards the community.
If I may, what would be the incentive for an international organization or international government like the United States to invest in the youth development in the region and fund organizations like yours, or assist the governments in place to reform their education and job training systems?
If we split this question into two, if it's going to come towards Anera or other NGOs on the ground that are working with the youth, I think with our projects that are more sustainable, it's not one-time thing, that because we are talking about employment and about the career of these youth. So sustainable programs should be an attraction for donors, international donors or other United Nations donors. So these sustainable projects that help the youth is an attraction for on one side. On the other side, if you want to go to the government departments and the educational governmental system, I think it's not a secret. Even the United States said it. Reforms. They need to apply reforms quick. And this is not only the request of the United States, it's the request of the international community, and the request also of IMF, World Bank, United Nations, and even us as international NGOs. We do call for immediate reforms to help us actually attract more funding and help the youth in achieving what they need to achieve.
Thank you. I would like to ask Andrew about the role of, you had mentioned earlier, generative AI and the trends you're seeing in the IT sector. Could you tell us a little bit more how the advancement in technology and the emergence of the generative AI contributed to the youth development in the region, and what challenges can it solve, and what are the drawbacks?
Yeah, well, I think it's hard to have a coffee conversation or a dinner conversation without generative AI coming up, at least at some point. It is an enormous topic, and I think we're still waiting to see, frankly, what the end results are going to be. I would say there's certainly a double-edged sword here. So the opportunities are there. I think youth have to become aware of what it is. I think it poses some challenges, certainly when you're looking at the ethical use and the responsibility there. And I think those types of conversations need to be happening at all levels within education at this point. I think there is the obvious opportunity that's there, whether it's entering a career as a prompt engineer or just how one uses and leverages AI in almost any sector. Youth who are prepared to do that are going to have an advantage over the next couple of years as this becomes part of the literacy of youth. But they're like computer adoption 25 years ago. It didn't happen all at once, and I think those that move on this more quickly are going to be in a more competitive place. I think the downside is that it could continue to contribute to a divide. And so there are going to be those that successfully leverage it to their advantage, and those who do not risk falling behind. And we'll certainly see that within countries and populations, but you'd like to avoid having certain countries or regions suffer from the lack of adoption and implementation, fully taking advantage of what can be done. So I think what it means in my mind is that educational training institutions have to be on top of this very quickly. They need to be educating people in the use, both the positive and the negative, becoming very critical consumers of information. This is something that the region, I think, needs to continue to focus on, is separating what is good, what is bad information. We continue to have, we have trouble doing that, but with the generative AI, it's going to become even more and more difficult. So I think a lot of focus needs to be paid here.
Absolutely. And I will ask the final question to Ali. With your expertise in the youth in the GCC region, what is the role that the youth are playing in shaping policies and strategies in the GCC currently? And what is the the role? How are we creating equal opportunities for female youth in education, employment, and leadership in this sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reason why we see so much change over the past couple of years in the GCC is because of the youth. Leadership has shifted from older generations to younger generations in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, and in Bahrain, in Oman, with the exception of Kuwait and Qatar as well. Almost all the leaders are under the age of 40, started in the ages of 30. And as a result, their own mentalities, their own, type of political systems are eventually what led to empowerment of the youth. With that being said, there is a long way to go. The youth do not have, the full power to induce changes and to create opportunities from themselves without the support of the government and without, the government pushing forward for these changes. Yes, there is a level of flexibility that could be afforded, but the political system doesn't allow it in all of these countries. Some may have it easier than others, for example, like Kuwait, and others may have a more tightened political system that doesn't allow for as much maneuverability. But I do see a prosperous future for the GCC. And I also do see a lot of opportunities for Arab youth in general, because the GCC will continue to attract the most attractive talent. It will continue to, be the powerhouse in terms of economic growth and economic opportunities for all of the countries in the Arab world. It's just a matter of to what extent are nationals prioritized over non-nationals. And I think that's something we didn't touch upon a little bit on this topic, but it's definitely important to note that almost all of the 6 countries have nationalization quotas being put in place, both in the public and the private sector, which is also creating some type of a problem in terms of attracting the best talent, because nationals have an upper hand in terms of who has the better experience. It's something that they've been working on because, as you know, the labor market is heavily influenced by foreign labor. And therefore, with the shortage of employment, the large youth bulge with like almost hundreds of thousands of jobs next 10 years for youth nationals, there needs to be a push towards securing their own citizens before others. But at the same time, the opportunities are plentiful. Just like there's an American dream, there's a Gulf dream. People are able to generate massive amounts of money, buy properties in their own countries, and as a result have a great relationship with the GCC. And one thing they say about the GCC is once you move there, you get way too comfortable. And that's the beauty of it. I think there is that flexibility, there is that comfort, there is that affordability in life, and it's available for everyone. Whether you come in as a immigrant worker or whether you come in as a professional in the administrative sector, there is room for improvement. There is a chance to make a great livelihood for many people at the GCC.
Thank you for making note of this very important aspect of the job market in the GCC. I think that's, the Arab youth, or, Arabs in general, have contributed heavily to the development in GCC countries and the diversification of the workforce that, brings in similar cultural nuance and cultural background and language, most importantly, which is something that is very vital for the development of a country in an authentic way that holds on to its values and its culture. Now, I know we're running out of time, but I do have one question that I've been dying to ask, and I hope that one of our speakers today could just give me an insight on it. Do you see any plausibility for a future of, the collaboration between educational institutions in the Arab world to implement an integrated cross-border student interchange program across the Arab world to advance cooperation between those universities and higher education institutions on education, training, and youth and sports, similar to that of the EU's Erasmus program? Whoever would like to answer, please go ahead. No takers?
I'll just take a quick stab. Not my complete area of strength, but I would say that certainly the possibility is there. My guess is that the GCC is probably the place where one would see this starting to begin with and build out. Their network of universities is obviously very strong already, and they have strong relationships with universities throughout Europe and in the United States. So that seems to me to be the highest potential for starting and then build from there. But others may have other observations.
Maybe also, it's not my area, but I would like to second what Andrew just said. And actually, it would be really interesting, actually, if it could be vice versa. We could send our youth to the GCC and use the expertise in the GCC within the educational institutes that we have over here in Lebanon and within the private sector to actually gain more experience and know-how and to build on this. And this would be really interesting as cross-sectional, not only for the youth in Lebanon, but actually to get the experience that they have already received within the GCC countries that I think, as Andrew said, this is the place to be now.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for your incredible insights today. There's so many more questions and so much more we can say about youth development. So as we draw to a close, I want to express again my gratitude to our esteemed panelists, Mr. Andrew Baird, Mr. Mahmoud Abdullah, and Mr. Ali Marafi for sharing their expertise with us today. This conversation was exceptional and hopefully impactful. Our journey towards Vision 2050 has been paved with remarkable possibilities and ambitious goals. Empowering the Arab youth is at the heart of this journey, and today's discussion has deepened our understanding of the challenges and strategies needed to create a thriving future for our young generation. As we move forward, let us remember that our collective efforts and collaboration will play a pivotal role in shaping a brighter future for the Arab world. By investing in education, enhancing skills training, and fostering a culture of entrepreneurship, we can create an environment where youth can flourish and contribute to a sustainable development of their communities and nations. The National Council on U.S. Arab Relations Conference has been an exceptional platform to discuss the road to 2050, and I am truly honored to have served as your moderator today. I extend my thanks to all the attendees and their active participation and insightful questions, and to Roland, who coordinated this program and brought us all together today. So let us remain committed to empowering Arab youth, embracing innovation, and nurturing an inclusive environment that ensures equal opportunities for all. And we can therefore navigate the challenges and seize the vast potential that Vision 2050 holds for the Arab region. Thank you all, and may the journey towards a prosperous future be one of unity, resilience, and progress. Thank you.
Now we'll have remarks from Mr. Hussam Qaid of the Washington Center for Yemeni Studies. Perhaps there's no single sister organization that has joined hands with us for this two-day proceedings than this particular one, the Washington Center for Yemen Studies. It's the newest and the youngest, and one could argue it's the most necessary and vital of the sister organizations, given the trauma and the tragedy that has been inflicted upon the government, the country, the infrastructure, the people, the economy, the development, the youth, and indeed Yemenis of all ages and backgrounds and contexts and descriptions. Mr. Hussam Qaid.
Hello, everyone. Peace be upon you all. My name is Hussam Qaid. I am the Government Affairs Manager for the Washington Center for Yemeni Studies, here to relay a message on behalf of our President, Abdul Samad Al-Fiji. The Washington Center for Yemeni Studies is a distinguished think tank that specializes in examining Yemen's political climate, humanitarian crisis, and social inequities. We were founded in 2019 by a group of dedicated Yemeni advocates with the goal of shedding light on intricate complexities of the Yemeni conflict, amplify crucial ideas often overlooked by the mainstream media, and explore sustainable solutions across various sectors. Ever since our inception, we have worked to organize multiple events. Obviously, in the beginning, faced with the COVID pandemic, we had to move to the virtual space, holding countless webinars. And then we were fortunate to move into the real world, organizing roundtables with different decision makers. And one of our first major projects was actually held in collaboration with the National Council on the U.S. Arab Relations, which was the first annual Yemen conference in Washington, D.C., entitled Yemen Under the Scope in 2022, where we brought a number of former diplomats in Yemen, a number of ambassadors, intellectuals and scholars, and Yemeni experts and advocates. We also very proudly held a youth panel. More recently, on the June of the ongoing year, we had the honor of organizing the first annual Yemen Advocacy Day, where we brought 100 Yemenis from the various states that has a high concentration of Yemeni American constituency to meet with their representatives and senators to communicate their concerns and deliver their demands. And we've actually recently heard really positive updates about one of the demands that we shared, which is the FSO Safar, the oil tanker that's sitting off of the coast of Hodeidah in the Red Sea that had been called a ticking bomb for years. Literally yesterday, the United Nations announced that 50% of the oil that was abroad has been salvaged by the salvaging ship that was sent by the UN. And we are beyond thrilled to be collaborating with the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations on their Road to 2050 conference. And we wish you a wonderful and informative conference. We look forward to further collaborations with them as a center in the future and with you as an audience. Have a good one.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct privilege and pleasure and honor to turn the final session over to Colonel Retired David DeRoche. David DeRoche is at the U.S. Department of Defense. It's Near East, South Asia Strategic and Security Studies Center. He's a senior international affairs fellow of the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations. Colonel DeRoche.
Well, hello and welcome to the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations panel on development plans for 2050 in the Arab world. As we all know, in recent years, a number of countries have put forth comprehensive development plans. Perhaps the best known is the Saudi Vision 2030, but there are a number of other plans that look to harness the revolution that we're seeing in technology. And we are indeed living in revolutionary times. I mean, think about it. 20 years ago, the idea of having something in your pocket that had photographs and music and that you could communicate with people, those were three separate and rather large brick-sized elements. Now everybody carries a phone, to the point that you're at a disadvantage if you don't have a phone. You find yourself cut off from certain financial transactions and the ability to enter a sporting event. You can't get a paper ticket anymore in the United States. So what we have today are three close observers of the Middle East and futurists and development workers, a wonderful range of experts. I will give a brief introduction of all three and then we'll go in line. So our first speaker is one of the eminence grise of Middle East studies in Washington, D.C., Ambassador Richard Schmierer. Ambassador Schmierer has just retired as the president of the Middle East Policy Council. He's now the chairman of the board of the Middle East Policy Council. He's has a distinguished service, a distinguished career of service to our nation in the Foreign Service of the United States. He was the ambassador to Oman, where he's still very fondly remembered. Whenever I go to Oman, people always ask me how was Ambassador Schmierer. He was also in the bureau, the head of the Bureau of Public Diplomacy at the Department of State, which is a notoriously difficult job to do. Probably, I mean, I would rather swim naked up the Kabul River with a knife between my teeth. It's a heck of a job, but he does everything with grace and style. And indeed, he's a model, not just of erudition, but also of gentlemanly conduct. Our second speaker, Mr. Habib Raja, has a long career in development and also is an academic expert in development, having obtained an advanced degree from the University of Salford in the United Kingdom. He has managed development programs all around the world. I would urge you to read his biography. It's truly humbling for those of us who think we make a contribution to the world. This is basically a life dedicated to service that is just one that humbles those of us who humor ourselves to think we know the region. And then finally, we have one of the foremost futurists in the United States, Mr. Stephen Kenny. He is affiliated with a number of institutions, but in Washington, it's the Middle East Institute. He has his own private firm, and this is the gold standard for futurists. He has an affiliation with Alvin Toffler, and that is a futurist reference that my mother knows. So that is the gold standard of interest. He is a graduate of the most exclusive campus of the University of California, Santa Cruz, which also has, I think, the most unusual college mascot in the United States. But if he wants to talk about that, he'll talk about that. What we're going to do is have each speaker give remarks for about 10 minutes or so. Then we will ask some questions. And if they're, if the speakers want to correct the other ones, of course, I will allow that to happen. So our first speaker is the man who appears with me in the current issue of Middle East Policy, which you see over my shoulder. That's one of the signal honors of my professional life. It's my honor to introduce you to Ambassador Richard Schmier.
Well, David, thank you very much. Let me begin myself by thanking the National Council for this opportunity to participate in this very important program. I'm a great admirer of the Council, and in the discussion today, I think we'll have a very valuable contribution to the U.S. Middle East dialogue. As someone who has lived and worked in the Arab world starting in the 1970s, I've had the opportunity to observe the great progress that this region has made over this period. Indeed, during my time as the U.S. ambassador in Oman, I was pleased when the UN Development Program released a report in 2010 citing the Sultanate of Oman as the country that had enjoyed the greatest development success of any country in the world over the previous 40 years. Similar development success has been achieved by a host of Arab countries in the past half century. Today, however, with these countries now very far along on the path of development, there are, in my view, a number of new and different challenges to their continued success in the coming decades. I will address my comments to three of these. First, the energy transition. Second, climate change. And third, the confluence of demographic and socio-political trends. On energy, the entire Arab world has benefited from the huge fossil energy resources that have been discovered in various Arab countries, most importantly in the Gulf, Libya, and Algeria. While the production and export of these mineral resources have directly benefited the countries in which they are located through large incoming revenue flows, this massive new income in the region has also fostered extensive labor mobility from Arab countries, resulting in significant expatriate remittances, enabled newly wealthy Arab states to provide aid and assistance to other Arab countries, and funded significant industrial and other investments from wealthy Arab countries in their fellow Arab states. Going forward, the era of fossil energy usage is poised to decline, which will affect the incomes of the energy exporting Arab states. However, the energy exporting countries in the Arab world are planning for this energy transition and are diversifying their economies away from being energy export dependent, and importantly, are investing in the new types of renewable energy sources that are becoming increasingly available and cost competitive. One of these, solar energy, is particularly well suited to this region, given the abundance and reliability of sunshine. Properly planned, the coming energy transition can become a net positive to the Arab world. And the evidence suggests that the leaders and technical experts in the region are aware of and preparing for such a transition. On a recent visit to Aramco headquarters in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, I was briefed on the efforts being made in the kingdom to anticipate and adjust to the coming new energy reality, which involves energy diversification and a prioritization on meeting specific energy needs, whether in transportation, electricity generation, desalination, or industrial production, as well as the continuing critical role of petrochemicals, without which the energy transition could never take place. So in terms of energy transition, it appears that this mega trend, which is expected to be largely completed by mid-century, is likely to prove beneficial to the Arab world. A second major challenge facing the region is climate change. No region has a greater stake in the current global effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to seek to cap the rise in global atmospheric temperatures. Rising temperatures in the Arab world are already a challenge to the habitability of the region, and increased water scarcity, growing desertification, and potentially greater food insecurity due to these effects of these developments on the region's agriculture are all trends that the leaders in the region must reckon with. An important aspect of the ability of the countries of the Arab world to address this challenge is the fact that their success in doing so will be dependent on actions and commitments by others around the globe to rein in the causes of climate change. Not just the Arab world, but the entire global community will have to work to mitigate the amount of climate change and to deal with its effects. Nonetheless, as with the challenge of the ongoing energy transition, the countries of the region are aware of these threats, have significant resources to apply in dealing with them, and are well underway in their preparations to address them. Finally, and in my view, perhaps most interesting, are the challenges, and I would suggest the great uncertainty, that the now well-developed, well-educated, and increasingly heavily populated region will face in the areas of demographic and socio-political trends and pressures. In these areas, there may be a need for political and other leaders to manage expectations and react to, or better yet, anticipate demands for change. In recent decades, the region has had mixed success as development efforts and a region-wide demographic surge have seen some Arab countries make unprecedented progress, while others have stagnated or even experienced decline. For the wealthier, rapidly developing countries, the stability and consensual governing approach of recent decades that has come from traditional and accepted dynamic leadership has enabled these countries to achieve perhaps the most rapid level of development in human history. Others have experienced upheaval and domestic turmoil as a result of political, economic, social, or other destabilizing developments. We have seen civil war in Yemen, Syria, and Libya, despotic, abusive governance in Syria, Iran, and previously in Iraq, and a largely failed state in Lebanon caused primarily by corruption and political militancy. In recent decades, the pursuit of modernization in the region triggered a largely religious-based reaction, which led to the rise of two terrorist organizations, Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, as well as a fundamentalist Shia clerical government in Iran. I think if we fast forward to 2050, the situation in the Arab world will be much changed. Religious reactionaryism will have run its course. The signs for this are already evident. Saudi Arabia is no longer promoting fundamentalist, austere Islamic tenets in other Muslim majority countries in competition with the Shia fundamentalism being exported by Iran. Rather, the kingdom is leading in the effort to modernize and promote social change to improve the lives of its citizens while continuing to embrace the principles of Islam. The turmoil that repeatedly characterizes the domestic scene in Iran, to me, provides clear evidence that the days of the current regime are numbered. Looking forward, we are likely to see a region that, after decades of religious-based violence and extremism as a response to modernization, has successfully learned to meld modernity with Islam. But that leaves open the question of if and how governments might need to respond to the demographic, social, and economic challenges they will face. The aspirations of a much larger, well-connected, and well-informed populations of the Arab countries will need to be met. The expectation management that is likely to be required to do that may trigger political changes that give citizens a larger voice in their own governance. I believe that at a minimum, the Arab world of 2050 will feature much greater levels of citizen involvement in determining government policies and leadership. In many cases, leaders in the region are already moving their countries in this direction. The expansion of Shura councils and the election of officials at various levels of government presage what I believe will be a broader movement towards citizen involvement in governance. Just how that involvement will take shape, whether through constitutional monarchies, through politically competitive, democratically elected assemblies, through expanded governance institutions at local, state, and national levels, and possibly in other ways, is unknown. But in a world of greater connectivity, information sharing, and communication, I think such a direction is inevitable for the countries of the region. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks and turn it back to you, David.
Well, thank you. Wow. You know, anything that ends with demographic change has a lot going for it. I think rather than take individual questions, we'll move to our next speaker, let the thoughts marinate, and then perhaps we'll have a different perspective on questions. So let's go straight into our second speaker, Habib Rajab. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I'm really honored to be part of this panel and to discuss and navigate the future of Middle East, or the potential future of Middle East. For a person who actually originally from Middle East and lived the dream and lived the challenges, and always proud to be from Middle East. Middle East is the homeland of the three major religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. It's the homeland of the major old kingdoms in Egypt, in Iraq, the regions that also created writing. So yeah, Middle East is the countries or the region that have very diverse culture, and it's a strategic in when it comes to the geopolitical location. When I look at the future of Middle East, I believe there are various factors, and these factors actually overlapped with the brilliant presentation presented by the first panel member. And when we look at the future in 2050, there are many influential factors that significantly will impact the region social and economic and political landscape. For example, when we're talking about the population and the youth, Middle East is one of the regions that has fastest and rapid population growth, and it is one of the primary challenges in the MENA region. This growth could be a bliss and it could be a curse for the region itself, because the education system in many of these countries has deficiencies, lack the link between the the modernization and the technology and the artificial intelligence technology line with their education system. For example, in Yemen, Sudan, Syria, and Lebanon, the youth are not really prepared for the changes that's happening within the market itself. This leading the youth to be either migrating, leaving their countries, and lead to drains of the brains, or becoming part of the joining extremists, joining armed groups, or becoming a silent, passive asset that never move. So I believe investigating or investing in the quality of education, training in the skills and the training, and empowering youth is crucial for the region. There are multiple countries that succeeded in modernizing their education, like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan to some extent, and other countries. And they could be an example and leading example to promote stability and improvement in the education system in these countries. One of the key factors, as well as in driving the future of the region, is the regional cooperation. The regional cooperation in the area actually faced crucial and misunderstanding, and it was not up to standards. So to recognize the stability of the region and neighboring countries, MENA countries must strengthen their regional organization. They should build trust among themselves and promote dialogue. Cooperate in security, trade infrastructure, resource management, and conflict resolution, which will enhance the stability and the growth of the region if they do it and properly and trust each other. One of the also important things when it comes to the new future of the Middle East is the new leaders that actually approaching or leading the new Middle East. For example, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Rashid, Mohammed bin Zayed. These new leaders will shape the countries of their countries, but as well as influence, and they're actually currently influencing MENA region. Their initiative with changing the economy, diversifying their economic resources, doing a very major social reforming, and acting as an alliance, and leading, for example, a military operation in Yemen, and as well as leading political dynamics that shape the region and becoming like regional superpowers among themselves. It's actually an asset for the Middle East that they have their own strong leaders that know what exactly should be the future of Middle East and how they shape the region itself. One of the factors that actually now might drive or shape the future of Middle East is actually Middle East mistrust, or the mistrust between the USA and the Western countries and Middle East. And that couple of countries in Middle East start exploring alternative partnership like BRICS, like partnership with China, partnership with Russia, and some countries are thinking seriously to join, for example, the BRICS, which give them an alternative opportunities, economic, social, and also diplomatic. And this recent development actually shown that also there should be an alignment in the foreign policy of Western countries and stability when it comes to dealing with the Middle East that we, or Middle East Western countries known in the last 30 or 50 or 70 years, is it changing and becoming less patient with the instability and the demands of a change when it comes to the political, social, and they start thinking by themselves, and they would like to shape the region the way that they think it's fit with their culture, with their religion, and this should be respected. One of the problems also occur, it's actually the instability in the U.S., for example, foreign policy and administration. Every administration is coming with new ideas that contradict the ideas that came up with the previous administration. And it seems that the United States has or lack the strategy to deal with the Middle East that also led to this kind of exploring mission that happening in the Middle East countries and looking for alternative partners. Even among their historical enemies, like, for example, Iran. We've seen recently this deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and they're trying to ease and peace and create I would say, relatively some harmonized relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which is unlikely to happen because of the willingness of Iran to expand and to overcome the I would say the superpower in the Middle East and the radicalism within the Iranian regime. One of also the key factors is actually the artificial intelligence, the change in the global system, which is balancing opportunities with the challenges, particularly in countries with growing population and inadequate, I would say, infrastructure, like, for example, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Libya. There are a huge number of young people are not really prepared to face the future, but countries that actually hosting this diaspora coming from these poor countries like Yemen or Egypt, they're also shifting into artificial intelligence, which requires less and less manpower. And these young generations or men and women coming from the poor countries won't have access to markets in the rich countries among the Middle East. And this requires lots of change in the education in the poor countries and lots of support from the richer countries to drive the education in their poor neighbors to meet with the requirement of their markets, the changing markets. I think one of also the key factors playing a role in Middle East is actually the regional powers in Middle East. If we look at the relationship and the major powers in Middle East like Saudi Arabia, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Turkey, they're actually sometimes impacting or negatively impacting their own region. For example, creating the militias in Sudan, in Yemen, in Syria, which cause this disability with their neighbors. I believe the countries in Middle East should understand that disability or the stability of their own neighbors will reach to themselves, and they have to be careful when it comes to dealing with their neighbors and try to find a way to cooperate and to enhance the relationship and the stability with their countries. And instead of neutralizing the natural resources of their neighbors like ports, islands, which will be maybe beneficial for their own resources like ports in Dubai or in Qatar and different countries, would be a limited or a short-term solution, but it won't be a long-term solution because the world is changing and the routes of trade are also dynamics. Now Iraq is creating a trail between or planning to between their main port and Turkey and Europe. China has their own route between Central Asia and Europe. So stability is a key factor in the Middle East. One of also the other factors that my colleague also mentioned is the economic diversity and the water scarcity. One of the key problems in Middle East when we look at the countries like Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, it's the accessing to water. There are countries like Turkey and Iran benefited from this instability in these countries and take more share of their water resources of these countries. Countries like Yemen and Iraq and Jordan, they almost depleted their underground water because there is low enforcement of the law. And this could be causing to a major migration waves that will affect not only rich countries in the Middle East, but also as well as Europe and other countries, because people won't have access to the simplest right and the most professional, virtual or to keep themselves life and improve their, basically agriculture and access to food as well. So navigating these challenges in Middle East It's very complex, but I believe the future of Middle East requires lots of work, internal and external, among the countries, rich countries and poor countries, more cooperation, but as well as requires stronger partnership with Western countries, with the United States, but also it requires a stronger commitments from Western countries and to have a stabilized foreign policy and to deal with mutual respect and to the sovereignty of Middle East countries as well as the Western countries, including the United States. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Although that complex interdependency reminds me of the John Donne, no man is an island entire of himself. Each is a part of a continent, or each is part of the continent, a piece of the main. So on that poetic note, we'll move to our futurist from the Middle East Institute, Stephen Kenny. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you, Dave, and I'll stick to that rather than poetry. It's interesting as I listen to Ambassador Schmier and Habib, the couple of trends that I want to spend my few minutes talking about really kind of nest into, in some interesting ways, some of the things that both of the prior speakers have said, and potentially have some possibility of influencing some of the things that they have both talked about. So what I'll talk about is a couple of trends that we have been looking at in my program at the Middle East Institute as part of studies that we're doing for the UN Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, and how we see in our work the potential for these trends to really have some potentially transformative effects in the Arab region between now and 2050. The first one is electric mobility, which is already having enormous impacts around the world, and it's an abundantly clear picture that the impact and that trend is going to continue to scale around the world. Just for some perspective, just 2 years from now in 2025, the projections are for anywhere from 15 to 20 million electric vehicles being sold annually around the world, well over 100 million on the roads and streets by that time frame. And in the larger markets, projections by 2040 are that electric vehicles are going to comprise upwards of 90% of the share of cars on the road. And the impact of electric mobility is not just from the passenger electric vehicles. Already today, there are more than 300 million electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers, scooters and e-bikes, on the streets and roads already today, and that number is going to continue climbing rapidly as well. So in the Arab region, this electric mobility trend is really only beginning to take off, but there's lots of evidence in the research that we've done that it's going to accelerate over the next 10 plus years. And with the right policy actions and other kinds of actions, there's a potential for it to really be kind of a hockey stick curve of growth. And as that happens, there's strong potential for some impacts that I think are kind of uniquely important in the Arab region. One is with respect to climate change mitigation, as combustion engine cars move off the road and are replaced with electric vehicles. A second, we've heard references already here a couple times to diversification of the economies of the region. E-mobility stands a chance to make a big role in that, and the creation of large numbers of jobs, and the reduction of inequity across the region, because it's going to increase access to transportation, which increases access to jobs and other socioeconomic opportunities. So we explored three different alternative future pathways that the trend of electric mobility might take in the Arab region over the next 20 to 30 years. The first of those focuses on the symbiotic impact that we can see between, on the one hand, electric public transportation, and on the other hand, electric micromobility, the two-wheelers and three-wheelers that I referenced a moment ago. The rate of growth for both the two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and interestingly for electric buses, are both higher than the growth rate for electric passenger cars, which is going to have an important impact. And in parallel, we're seeing and this is globally, but to include in the Arab region, the emergence of what's called mobility as a service, which integrates all of those micro mobility transport modes plus ride sharing and ride hailing into kind of an integrated on-demand single user experience and connects those modes to public transportation. And that's where that symbiotic effect starts to happen. So all of that is already happening in the Arab region. And so one of the ways that electric mobility might scale and the impact of it might scale is by recognizing that mutually reinforcing impact of, what I'll call kind of the big end of the electric mobility spectrum with public transportation and the small end with the micromobility and the mobility as a service, and making it a deliberate, intentional economic development and urban redevelopment initiative to co-develop those two ends of the spectrum so we can achieve that effect and really accelerate the advancement of electric mobility. The second pathway that we looked at is an economic diversification pathway, and it looks at creating a growing presence for Arab region countries in the global electric mobility supply chain. There's already a strong, kind of pretty robust automotive industrial capacity in the region, particularly in Egypt and Morocco. But we're seeing over the last few years, and this will increase as well, other countries in the region developing their own automotive industrial capacity, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Tunisia, Jordan, Lebanon. And importantly, those countries are focusing on developing electric automotive industrial capability, kind of skipping over largely developing the capacity to do the development and manufacturing of combustion engine vehicles. And it's not just the car manufacturing itself that will be part of this growing Arab presence in the e-mobility supply chain. The two-wheelers and three-wheelers that I mentioned, we're seeing startups throughout the region making those. Startups in that mobility as a service area that I talked about. And looking back at electric passenger vehicles, the global manufacturer of those, in the U.S. and China and Europe, they're completely rethinking their approach to the global supply chain out of necessity because of the technologies involved in and the markets involved in these digitalized and electric vehicles. And that's already creating opportunity for countries in the Arab region to emerge as tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 component suppliers and as assembly plant locations for those outside of the region auto manufacturers. Battery technologies and charging infrastructure will be particular sort of niches within the supply chain that can be very valuable for economic diversification and growth in the region. And this pathway is also an investment in the development of digital skills for the populations, including, most importantly, youth. And those skills will have broader applicability in other parts of the digital economy. The third pathway that we looked at focuses on how electric mobility can be both a catalyst and an enabler for regional modernization of electrification and the transition to renewable energy. And the renewable energy transition I'm talking about here is not just in the mobility sector itself, but in every sector of the economy and at the population level. And the key to that is that the electric vehicle batteries are a means of storage of variable renewable energy like solar and wind. And so if we see a mass electrification of mobility, we'll have hundreds of thousands and eventually millions of batteries on the roads and streets that are able to send energy back into the grid and help address a lot of the grid reliability and grid flexibility issues that plague most of the countries in the region. So the batteries become the source of power, not just for the vehicles themselves, but they're able to power buildings and industries and anything that's connected to the grid. So we see a lot of potential for electric mobility to have really transformational effects on the region, regardless of what pathway the trend takes. Let me take just a couple minutes more briefly to talk about another technology trend that we're looking at. We're kind of in the early stage of this work, but that's the metaverse. So we're talking about the next iteration of the internet, which is immersive, hyper-realistic, persistent 3D virtual spaces that are enabled by virtual reality, augmented reality, and other technologies. And they're able to create, sort of very vivid, lifelike online experiences, but more importantly, very interesting and important practical applications. So, the buzz around metaverse today is largely driven by Facebook's pivot in that direction. But what they're talking about, what they're developing is what I would call a social metaverse that builds on social media paradigms and gaming paradigms. That's going to have important effects, but The use cases that are emerging in what I would call the impact metaverse really are poised to have transformational effects around the world, to include in the Arab region, because we're seeing that already in our research. Metaverse technology is already being applied in education, in healthcare, and engineering, agriculture, urban planning, tourism, government, climate action, a range of other areas. And the impacts of those are going to have really important effects. There's a McKinsey analysis that estimates $5 trillion worth of value that will be created in and by the metaverse just by 2030. And that's by taking into account not just the technology industry that's creating the metaverse, but all the additional value that's going to be unlocked by these technologies in all of those sectors that I just referenced. So it's an early stage trend globally, but we're already seeing it start to emerge in the Arab region as well. Our research has surfaced initiatives, metaverse-related initiatives that are ongoing or planned in UAE and Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, but not just in the wealthier GCC countries. We're also seeing these initiatives in Egypt, in a number of other countries as well, Lebanon, Jordan, and others. The UAE is, aiming to be one of the top 10 metaverse economies in the world. In Saudi Arabia, the development of NEOM is drawing very heavily on metaverse technologies, and we're seeing applications in healthcare in the UAE, in training and development by the government of Morocco, and other instances of this. So again, this is an early stage trend globally that we think will have very important impacts in the Arab region, including in ways that even the people who are driving these trends have probably not yet begun to anticipate. So let me stop there.
Wow, we got so much to think about. This is, this is the beauty of looking at forward planning. Is the future is unconstrained, and reality as we know it is really just a jumping off point. So it leads to a lot of interesting construction. So let's start with Ambassador Schmier. My question for you is, in the United States, when we look at the transformation of the economy in the last 40 years, people argue that, this is a staple of the political dialogue on both sides in the United States, that we've separated into a few hyper-rich people who own yachts and some other people who are stuck doing hourly wages or gig economy, can't afford to buy a house. And the former middle class that worked, in factories or whatever, but was able to have a comfortable existence, become homeowners, have cars, have families, that's vanishing. When we look at this transformation in the region, obviously you had a much more striated social structure. How will these changes affect that? Will they lead to stability or instability? Will they be able to manage that transition, or will they, the same problems that we have be faced perhaps with greater or lesser consequences?
Well, David, I think that's a very good question, and one that's going to be difficult to answer, but I do think there are certain trends out there that are encouraging, at least in some of the countries, maybe some of the wealthier countries, but I think they also spill over into those that aren't as wealthy. What I would cite are things like the increase in education in the region, and in particular, if you look at certainly the wealthier countries, the number of people graduating from universities, and in particular, the fact that it's more women graduating than men, that's going to, I think, strongly help these economies adjust to that new reality. You're seeing things like declining birth rates, so family size makes it a little bit easier to make ends meet. And then you're seeing the rise of the two-income family. And then interestingly, anyone who's been certainly to the Gulf lately, you'll see that there's really been a transition in the workforce. And what's happened is there really are now many opportunities for employment for citizens of those countries that you might call sort of middle class type positions, things in the tourism industry and the service industry, small businesses, a lot of entrepreneurship, a lot of startups. And those are all areas where are likely to provide very good, or at least, comfortable middle class existences for the people. So I think those transitions will all help these countries address what really will be a challenge, as you described, because they will continue to be dependent upon expatriate labor at the lower levels of the labor spectrum. But I think they are now becoming more successful in creating sort of middle class type employment opportunities for their own citizens. And I think those other trends, such as two-income families and higher levels of education, will all contribute to their ability to address what will still be a challenging issue.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point. I mean, the last time I was in Saudi Arabia, I visited a supermarket that I've been going to for years. And as I was leaving, I noticed that the cashiers, there were like 7 of them all in a line. They used to be men from South Asia, and they were all Saudi women. And it wasn't until I was like, something's unusual. And I turned around and realized that, yeah, so we really are in the middle of a revolution that I certainly didn't foresee. And I as it started, I kind of, okay, they said they're going to do this, but the pace of change has just been striking to me and to others, I think. Habib, if we can turn to you, unfortunately, you're stuck with a portfolio of bad things that happen. Everybody else is talking about the promise of the future. And I think that's the curse of people who work in development and humanitarian assistance, is you never get asked about pleasant things. So I apologize in advance, but when you look at how the West has engaged the Middle East on this, a lot of the engagement is seeking the potential in a commercial sense, usually. But a lot of it is to moderate the possibilities of bad things happening. Europe in particular, a lot of their interaction in the region is based on trying to prevent the possibility of a state implosion or a catastrophe that leads to mass migration. A lot of the Western involvement, and to be fair, even Eastern involvement, is based at trying to prevent the possibility of a war developing. That seems to be the animating principle. So outside powers of all sorts, Eastern and Western, tend to have an idea that they're going in there not to make good things happen, but prevent bad things from happening. Will these changes that we're talking about here, do you think as a practitioner, do you think that these will increase moderation of the stuff that everybody's afraid of, or will it actually accelerate the bad stuff? What's your feel?
I believe it's both. It's accelerating the good stuff and the bad stuff, because when we look at Middle East, we look at if we classify the countries in Middle East, we can classify them into stable kingdoms and unstable republics. And what we notice that the influence of both the West and the East kind of stabilized the countries that have the rich countries and destabilize the poor countries because of the countries of the corruption itself, because poor utilization of their resources, and I would say the political war between the East and West, the investment of China and the investment of United States, which is, for example, 2 different dynamics, 2 different approaches, led to the dictatorships lean toward China, because it's an investment with the government, it's an investment in line with their way of working, while the investment of the West and United States in line with transparency, democracy, and it's not in favor of dictatorships or the regimes that last for decades in the countries. While in the rich countries, I believe that they kind of fed up the pressure that's social pressure required. I mean, for example, in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman did a major transformation, but it's still, the West is not, I would say, happy with, I would say they're asking for more, and they're asking for more. And as well as I think there was also, they're looking at Saudi Arabia as a market for their weapons, and they're looking for Saudi Arabia to give a partnership or alignment without limitation, without looking also to the sovereignty of Saudi Arabia. For example, like the oil prices, there were lots of pressure from the West countries because they had an attention or focus on the war with Ukraine and the prices that affecting their own countries. But at the same time, they're looking at their only interests without looking at the interest of the countries themselves. So I believe this competition between East and West will bring the region into good things, but it will only bring the good things and the empowerment and modernization to the countries that are stable, and they have know how to play the political game between these two different powers. But the countries that are unstable will be stabilized more, because, for example, we've seen Saudi Arabia turning their back and most of Arab countries to the decision or the point of view of the West regarding the Syrian regime, while they decided to go toward it. But this is not a solution, because Syria is now subdivided into main three, I would say, sub-countries. Some controlled by the Kurdish forces, some controlled by Turkey and their alliance, and the Syrian regime, which is aligned with Iran, which is not even in line with the Arab countries. But this is kind of, will lead and will continue this disability of Syria. The same in Yemen, for example, creating this militia, and the West countries have no one opinion or one point of view, and they're kind of going loose and firm at the same time with the influence of Saudi Arabia and Emirates, leading to destabilizing the country itself, which is also in favor of the Iranian regime, because they're selling their weapons to Houthis, and they're destabilizing the region itself. The same could be for Libya, Sudan. So if the country is stable and having I would say a strong leadership, and mainly the kingdoms and monarchies, they will continue benefiting from that. But fragile and failed state will not benefit, and they will go into more and more fragility and destabilization.
Well, not very optimistic, but certainly honest. So I appreciate that. Stephen, you kind of touched only en passant on the importance of grids to all this. I mean, it's a beautiful vision. But, like in California, for example, which has more adapters of electric cars than most, we're seeing stress on the grid, and people are being urged, for example, to charge their cars during the day. When I was a boy, the thing was, do your laundry at night to minimize impact on the grid. So they're being urged to do it during the day, and there is the very real possibility of grid overwhelmness. In some countries, Iraq, the grid is not adequate. They're still flaring off natural gas. Is there a conflict between the mega fixed infrastructure and this vision of, as you term it, micro transportation? Is that a looming disaster? Is that something that's manageable? And then my second question is, this vision of batteries is great. They're dependent upon a number of strategic minerals, cobalt, lithium, nickel, that different countries are trying to lock up sources and markets from. It's not a battery thing, but gallium, which is essential for production of modern electric circuits. China has restricted the exports of gallium. So are we possibly, I understand the environmental benefits, but politically, are we on the verge of swapping a petrol cartel for a strategic metal cartel?
No, those are both great questions. With respect to the first one, will the grid be able to handle this in the Arab region? The short answer is no. The grid is in need of, in all these countries, is in need of serious modernization, whether or not there's a mass electrification of mobility, and whether or not there's even a serious transition to renewable energy, either in the mobility sector or in a broader sense. And the important thing in doing this kind of work around looking at alternative futures is being able to sort of see things that we need to get out in front of. And the key future focused thing to do here with respect to your question about the grid is to, as we begin to do that modernization, there's a whole host of complications for doing that. It's much more difficult to raise the capital to do grid modernization, for instance, than it is to build new energy production capacity. But as we begin to do the modernization of the grid, the key future focused thing to do is to do it in a way that's compatible with and accommodates what's called vehicle to grid charging technology. Most of the charging technology now that has been deployed, and there's a very, very insufficient amount of charging infrastructure deployed, even in the US and Europe, let alone in the Arab region. It's one way. It's the energy goes from the grid into the vehicle. Vehicle to grid is the idea of sending the energy back from the battery, as I was describing it earlier, back into the grid. And that's a technology that's not ready for large-scale deployment anywhere in the world right now. It's in kind of trial stages. But if we're thinking in a future-focused way about how to do grid modernization in the region, we need to do it in a way that is compatible with that technology so that when it is available, we've already done that work and we don't have to retrofit at additional, significant kind of needless expense to do a second round of modernization. So that's going to be the key, not just to that pathway of sort of the connection between grid modernization and mobility and renewables, but really for any pathway that that electromobility takes in the region. Doing that kind of future thinking about how to do the grid modernization smart is the key to that. With respect to the batteries and minerals, I mean, snapshot in time today, I think it's probably not an unfair characterization to say we're at risk of being hostage to a different kind of cartel. There's a lot of effort going on around the world, in the U.S. and a lot of other countries, to find additional sources of those minerals, and it's going to come. Doing that exploration is going to come at great expense, but the cost of not doing it is partly what you've already alluded to, and the other cost of it or risk of it is if we don't do that exploration, there's no chance that we're going to be able to keep up with the demand for batteries. The battery demand is expected to be 15 times what it is today, just before the end of this decade, and that's just going to continue to skyrocket. So all that exploration is ongoing, including, interestingly, in the Arab region itself. In 2021, the Abu Dhabi government signed an agreement with an Australian mining company that also does sort of the chemical sort of processing to build the first lithium processing plant in the Arab region. And in the same year, in 2021, Saudi Arabian government signed a deal with a different Australian mining company that includes licenses for doing exploration for nickel and lithium in Saudi Arabia. And the CEO of the Saudi mining company that signed that deal has said at that time that they are getting ready to spend a huge sum of money doing that exploration to find those minerals in Saudi Arabia. And we're going to see that more and more around the world. So, right here today, we're at risk of, sort of the preponderance of that mineral acquisition that China has, but that will change over time too. And again, it's about getting out in front of that and doing that exploration now rather than sort of waiting until it's too late.
All right. Well, thanks for that comprehensive answer. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, when you look at this development of minerals, I mean, one of the big problems is sometimes I ask myself, do we really want to develop all these minerals, because refining them involves so much environmental damage, and it might be you could argue, I could see somebody 50 years down the road, if the United States doesn't onshore a lot of this production, making the argument that we basically exported a real serious pollution problem by not developing our own thing. And perhaps that is a strategy, although not a very kind one. This could go on forever. The The problem with talking about the future is the future comes to you quicker than you think, sometimes while you're in the middle of the seminar. And so we're rapidly out of this. So what I want to do is ask each of the participants if they have a closing remark, a short closing remark that they'd like to do, and then we'll wrap it up. So we'll stick with our order and start with Ambassador Schmier.
Well, thank you, David. As I've tried to indicate, there are a lot of uncertainties. We don't really know where things will go, but I guess I would have to say that I'm optimistic and bullish on the fact that the region does see what issues it faces, what challenges it faces, to a large extent has the resources to address them. And so I therefore think that we will see the Arab world become more prosperous, become more stable, become more successful in the decades to come. I'll leave it there.
One optimist, Habib, your take?
Yeah, I'll add up. I'm really actually optimistic to some extent, not to a huge extent, but I believe that there are lots of opportunities in the Middle East, and the transformation occurred in the last couple of years, especially in Saudi Arabia. I would say the social transformation. It's an example that everything can be possible and major change can happen, even in, I would say, in most, if we can say, radical places or systems within countries. So I believe that we'll see more examples of this transformation in Middle East region. And I think the establishment, also the relationship between Israel and United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, it's also another good example happened in the last couple of past years. And if Middle East countries, including Israel and Arab countries, could find a way to cooperate and stabilize what's not stable, these opportunities will grow and continue growing, and the region will be the vital and the heart of the world. Thank you.
All right, two optimists. And now turning to our professional futurists, Mr. Canny.
Thanks, Dave. I guess what I would say is what's essential, in my view, for the future of the Arab region to be a desirable future as we look out 10, 20, 30 years from now, is take every single one of the issues and factors that Ambassador Schmier talked about and Habib talked about. What we need to do is do some thinking about what the alternative futures for each of those issues might be. There's never been a scenario developed that comes to pass exactly as it's developed, and that's not the point of doing this kind of thinking. The point is thinking about the different possibilities so that when we see the real future emerging, we've already spent some time thinking about something kind of like that, and we're not starting from scratch in terms of what we need to do to realize the opportunity or forestall the challenge, and to see those kinds of things, whether it's a type of policy action or a type of investment or some other kind of action, to see actions that will be beneficial in a range of different futures and start making our investments in those kinds of actions, because it's kind of a no regrets approach. No matter what happens in the future, we've done something that we recognize will pay dividends and create beneficial impacts, regardless of what pathway the particular issue in question winds up going down.
So we'll call that the Edith Piaf plan, no regrets. Well, I want to thank the people here. You know, it really is remarkable. I'm old enough to remember when one of the best-selling books was called The Late Great Planet Earth. And there was a substantial body of scientific theory that held that, you know, the world was going to have a food crisis by 1980, and that we were going to actually be in global freezing, that was our greatest worry. Then, of course, when I was in college, the big fear was that the big book to read was Jonathan Schell, The Fate of the Earth, which, you know, said that it was almost inevitable that we'd have a global winter, absent radical arms reduction measures, which, as it turned out, would have been far less effective than what we actually got. Far more numbers of nuclear weapons floating around the world. Human ingenuity is boundless, and there are a lot of people out there working on it. I remember one of my, Tony Allen, a great geographer at the School of Oriental and African Studies, realized that a big part of the Middle East water problem was solved by what he called virtual water, which was food imports. There's always creative ways of thinking about this, and hopefully man's ingenuity will overcome it. But the challenges we face are substantial, and they can't be waved away. And this ingenuity comes with vision, with foresight, with leadership. So I want to thank our three panelists here for giving us some sense of what the challenges and the opportunities are. And I also want to thank the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations for convening this important panel at a very important time. And we've got a lot to think about. The dialogue can continue at the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations website. And of course, you can follow that for information on other panels of this. And with that, and belatedly, I have to state that I should have stated at the outset that my remarks do not reflect the view of any agency of the United States government. So having said that, I do, however, want to assure you that I thank you for your participation and your time and wish you the best. Have a nice day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to bring these remarks to a close, but not before thanking all of those who rolled up their sleeves and put their shoulders to the wheel to make this event possible. When things are run so seamlessly as they are and have been here, we give special thanks to Mr. Roland Robinson of the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations, who is the Senior Programs and Communications Manager at the National Council. Mr. Robinson has worked tirelessly behind the scenes with each and every one of the participants on the admin side, the vendor side, the logistics side, the procedural side. So we're immensely grateful to Roland Robinson. And not least, for sure, the 16 participants who gave of their time and energy and addressing matters of conviction and commitment that they deem to be as important as all of us who labor in the vineyards of trying to improve America's relations with its friends, its partners, and its working allies in the region, from Morocco to Muscat, Baghdad to Berber, Algiers to Aden, Aleppo, Alexandria, and Aden in between. As an educational organization, we feel proud to add this event to a series of webinars, Zoominars, seminars that we have to contribute to our educational mission. And we hope that each and every one of you is as enlightened as I am, having benefited from the presentations and contributions of these outstanding, renowned international specialists and foreign affairs practitioners on what is undeniably, arguably, the most vitally important corner of planet Earth. Thank you. Best wishes to everyone.